Hey guys. So if you watched the video last week, or not last week, but if you watched the video last night, you might notice that there's no audio. And I hope you didn't watch the whole thing hoping the audio will kick in at some point if you get a chance to watch it. And if you didn't, well then it's all good. The problem is, and it was operator error, I forgot to turn on my lapel mic. And so I think that's why there was no audio because I don't think I turned it on last night. But we had a great night last night. We talked about our verses that a lot of times get misunderstood. We'll spend some time talking about that in a minute. We played a game called "What Happens Next," and it was these section of video clips. And in the section of video clips, you had to figure out what happened next. And shout out to Allison for winning. She was pretty excited about winning. I want to make sure my mic was not muted. But she was pretty excited about winning, and so she gets a bag of candy next week. And so if you see Allison, tell her, hey, make sure you tell Richard to get you a bag of candy. Anyway. But so we've been talking about this passage of scripture, and we've been talking about how a lot of times people will have a misunderstanding of what the passage is, and how, just like in the game that we played, we don't always know what's going to happen next. You know, we don't know how things are going to work out in life. That's just life. Life is hard. That's true for the game, like I said, that we played last night, and it's true for situations in our lives. When we're going through something, we hope that things will work out or that things will go the way we want them to do, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. So what do we do in those moments when they don't turn out the way that we hope? And so, last week we looked at Philippians 4:13, which said we can do all things through Christ who gives us strength, and how a lot of times that's looked as some sort of weird lucky charm or superpower to where you can do anything, and that's how a lot of times people try to convey it. And the reality of it is that's not that way. Now, again, like I said last week as well, if you have this verse and this is kind of your theme verse, or these verses are your theme verse, there's nothing wrong with that. And you might be hearing some birds, and it's because there's a nest right in the crevice of where my roofs meet. And so there's a nest, and so there's a bunch of baby birds, and they hear me and they're excited for whatever reason. So if you hear them, I'm sorry. But anyway, but there's nothing wrong with having these verses as long as we understand really what the verse is trying to say. And tonight's verse has to do with trials and tribulations, which is a common theme in the Bible, especially among the writings of Paul and Peter, and it's a common theme because during that time they were going through a lot of stuff. The early church was. They were outcasted. They were cut off from their families. They lost loved ones. They were being persecuted for their faith. They were going through all kinds of things. They were mocked. They were often poor, struggling to make ends meet. Even last week we read about how Paul said he had to make do with a little as well as a lot. And so we aren't necessarily persecuted like they were. We're not going to be arrested because we are sharing our faith or anything like that. But and I shared about how back then they would be arrested, and the little fish that you see on the back of cars or on stickers or shirts or wherever, that was the early Christian symbol. That meant that if you saw this on a house, or if somebody drew it in the dirt, that's how they knew that they were believers with each other. And so we don't necessarily have to do with that. That's for sort of persecution, but we also go through hardships. We also deal with sickness and people making fun of us, or we lose loved ones, and we have financial stress. We struggle and fight against these and so many other things. And sometimes when we're going through a difficult time, somebody might use this passage with the best of intentions. And the passage tonight, or today, I should say, because it's not tonight, the passage is one that a lot of people might read and share with us. It's Romans 8:28. And this is what it says. It's Romans 8:28. You might even know it, might even have it memorized. It says, "We know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose." And we just take that verse on its own, it might sound like that all things are worked out to be okay, or all things are worked out to be good. And I think people mean well when they say it to us in those times of stress or in those times of hardship. those times of heartache. I think they mean well. I don't think they're trying to be hateful or deceitful or just, anything like that. I think they mean well. But still, we got to understand the misconceptions that we have and embrace the greater biblical truth behind it. And the misconception is typically this, is that with this verse, is that no matter what happens, everything is going to be okay. Everything is good. That everything that happens is good. Everything that happens is okay. And that's not true. And I think that comes from a desire, because we don't want to see people hurt. We don't want to see people sad. We want to do something to encourage them. So I think that's how it kind of got started, with that sort of misconception about Scripture, that what that passage is saying is that everything's good, everything's okay. And I get the idea of comfort, and we should seek comfort. We should seek to be comforted. Jesus himself said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." Right. The problem is, though, if we are using Romans 8:28 to say that everything is all okay or is all good, we set ourselves or other people up for disappointment. What do I mean by this? Well, what I mean by this is that the death of a loved one. Think about this for a second. The death of a loved one. Let's say you have a family member or a friend, grandma, somebody that gets sick and they pass away, and it's someone that you loved and you cared about. And it may be hard to believe that things can turn out to be okay. I mean, what would make that situation better and fix the hurt? It would, in the death of a loved one, like say a grandparent. Well, more than likely it would be that they come back to life and get better, right? So if that's what it means for the situation to be okay or to be good, then we know it definitely won't ever be okay or good. And a lot of times, too, is that we have this mentality of like, well, God just needed an angel. Or that that when they die, they're now an angel. That's not right. That's not accurate. That's not biblical. Angels are a created separate being. When we die, we don't become angels. And to say that God just needed them more than we did, that almost sounds like God is mean, and God is unloving and uncaring, and that he's jealous, and that he's selfish, and that's really, in that instance, is not who God is. And there are countless other situations where the definition of everything turning out okay sets us up for disappointment, and at worst, it makes God a liar. How can he say that how can he say that he works all things for the good of those who love him if he won't fix our situation or put things back the way they were? That's not very good. So the thing that I'm getting at with Romans 8:28 is that if everything is all okay and good, if that's the understanding of the passage, it leaves us with a big question. What if it isn't? Last night I shared about my nephew Brendan. He was a baby. He would be 20 in just a few days, but he's not here. He passed away when he was 4 days old. He had a heart defect that nobody knew about. And I shared about how I remember hearing the news about him dying. My mom called me. I was hanging out with my friends. It was back when Crystal and I, before we got married, we were dating. And my mom calls me and she says, your nephew has stopped breathing. And he's at the hospital. He's in the ER room. And I had no idea what was going on. I called Crystal and I said, "Hey, can you go with me?" And so I picked her up and we drove. The ride was a blur between Conway and Stuttgart, and my brother comes out. I go to the ER. My brother comes out and he says he's in heaven. That wasn't a good thing. Wasn't fair. So to say that God works everything for good, that everything is good or everything is okay, that's just, this is wrong. I mean, there's got to be more, right? Um, it's this verse is encouraging. It is, and I'll talk more about what what happened in the after effects of Brendan's passing that are still kind of felt today in my family. But if to say that it was good, no. We got to understand the core truth behind this passage. And it is meant to encourage us when we're struggling. It's meant to comfort us during hard times. And that being said, this verse is not saying that everything will be okay, that everything's all good, and that all of our problems will be solved. It's definitely not meaning that. So let's spend some time looking at this passage. So in Romans 8:28, again, it says, we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. That we know, that we read and we understood. But we kind of need to know what kind of good is being talked about here. And the answer to that is in the next verse. It's in verse 829. Even the birds agree. But it says this in Romans 8:29, for those he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his son, so that he would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. Now that word for could be probably better translated because. So when you read 8:28 and 29, it'll probably say something like, we know that all things work together for the good of those who love God, because those he foreknew, he predestined to be conformed to the image of his son, so that he would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. But what does this all mean? What is all this about? He foreknew, he predestined us, and we could go. We could have a whole Bible study series that talks about predestination and foreknowledge, and those are big topics, and those are things we do need to talk about. But for today, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that word "good" in light of what we just looked at and what we just read. Basically, we have a purpose in being Christians, right? And that big purpose is to be more like Jesus. The verse, verse calls this verse calls that being conformed. We are to be conformed to the image of Jesus. Think about like Play-Doh. You want to build something with Play-Doh when you were a little kid, or maybe you still play with Play-Doh. But you want to build something when you're a little kid, and so you form and you fashion something, and what that Play-Doh is doing is it's being conformed, it's being molded, conformed to what you would have it to be. It's being shaped. That's basically what being conformed is being shaped. And for us as believers, we're to be shaped to be formed to be more like Jesus, right? Throughout our lives, we should become more and more like Jesus in the way we think, in the way we live, and how we react, and how we handle things. So, given that context, was the good that God works in every situation? Well, God is working everything to the good of those who love Him. Is about making us more and more like Jesus. It's not that the thing that happened is good. And I think we need to be clear about that. The thing that happened, the bad thing that happened, is not a good thing. If you're going through something and it's not been a good thing, please understand that's not from God. But God can take that thing and bring good from it. And we'll talk more about that. And a big thing is that we get to become more like Jesus. It's not like, I did this. God is not like, I did this horrible thing to you, so that way you can become more like. No, it's more like, this thing is a hardship. This thing hurts. This thing is painful. Allow me to work this, and through this process, I will make you become more like Jesus. Now, this doesn't mean physically we're going to look like Jesus, okay? All right, we're not going to have a beard. As you can tell, I shaved my beard off. It was time for a reset, so I just did it. But but that would be strange if we were all transforming into some sort of physical, especially if it's our version of how we think Jesus looks. We don't know if he had a beard or not. What Paul said here in Romans, though, it's not a physical transformation to where all of a sudden, we look like Jesus. but it's in the way we live our lives. It should become increasingly similar to how Jesus would live, how he would feel, what he would say, so on and so forth. So think about that. Think about faith for a minute. We'd say that Jesus had a limitless supply of faith, right? That his faith in God was perfect, that it was without flaw, that it never wavered, that he never doubted, he never lost sight of the Father. Even when he said things like, if there's any other way, please let this cup pass, but I want your will, not my will, to be done. He said that on the night he was about to be betrayed. But he went through and he followed through. That's what Jesus did. Now, we're human. We are fully human. We are not necessarily like that. We have doubts. We get distracted. We forget to pray. All kinds of things. That's just, we're human. But the thing is, we aren't supposed to stay at the same level of faith or any other virtue for that matter for the rest of our lives. We're meant to grow. Think about this. If you play sports or just something that you started off doing and it was hard, it was difficult, it was challenging, and you didn't really know how to do it. And it might, especially if you were an athlete and you're learning how to do this, it was painful. It hurts, right? You get sore, right? For me, running, when I started running, my legs were killing me. It's like, how dare you do this to me? I'm going to get back at you, and it's just painful for days. But now I can go for a run and I might go for a more challenging run or a not so challenging run, but it doesn't hurt, right? And even when I go for those more challenging runs, it doesn't hurt like it used to when I never ran. And it's because your body has this amazing ability of adapting and conforming, there's that word again, to the task at hand, to the exercise, to where it's able to handle and do. Your body's just an amazing instrument. And so the same is true in our faith. That, that's just, and a part of that growth is hard. It's messy. It's not always pretty. We might encounter a situation where we feel sad, where we feel hopeless, where we feel worried or anxious. And in those times, sometimes the only thing we can do in those moments is cry out to God and to trust him in the process. We may have exhausted every other means of help and just simply got to fall on God to trust in him. And that's what he calls us. It's like that poem I shared last night, Footprints in the Sand. And you might know this poem, and it goes. It talks about how this guy is having this dream, and he's walking with God, and he's looking, and he sees that there are times in his life he's seen, like in the sky, these images of his life, and he sees that at certain moments of his life there's only one set of footprints, and they're always at the hardest moments in his life. And so he finally is like, God, what's up with this? Why do I have... And I'm paraphrasing this. Check it out. Do a search. Footprints in the Sand poem. It's a pretty cool poem. It's cheesy. It might be cheesy, but it's a pretty cool poem. And he says, to God, he says, hey, God, what's up with these one set of footprints? That was happening, at these hardest times in my life. I thought you were going to be with me every step of the way. And God says to him, in those moments, I was carrying you. Oh man, that's such a true statement. In those hard moments when we don't understand what's going to happen or anything, those are the moments we need to lean on God and allow God to carry us. And what happens when we do that? Where our faith grows. It becomes even just a little bit more like the kind of faith that Jesus had, that Jesus has. And that is good for us for several reasons. One being that we are better prepared to trust God with the next trial that we encounter. And the same kind of thing can be true of our love, our joy, our peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, any other part of our lives. And the greatest good we could ever have is to become more like Jesus. God doesn't leave us in the state we are in when he finds us. He transforms us to be like Jesus. And this is what it says in Romans 8:30. And those he predestined, he also called. And those he called, he also justified. And those he justified, he also glorified. This verse helps us understand that God never gives up on us and is always at work. In good seasons and bad seasons, God is always at work. that he doesn't stop. He doesn't just help us moment by moment. He has changed. He has changed our eternity and is making us more and more like Jesus until the day we go to heaven. And he doesn't stop. So there's a couple of things that we can pull away in light of all this, but as we kind of just put it all back together with what really Romans 8:28 is about, is that first, no matter what the situation, no matter what the outcome is, God has not abandoned you. He said that again in case you're writing it down. The first thing that you need to know and understand is that no matter what the outcome is, God has not abandoned you. It can be so easy to think in those moments that God has left us, that God has forgotten us. But the reality of it is he has not. In the middle of your most difficult situations in life, know that God is still there with you and that he is still at work in you. Even when you can't see him, he is moving and doing things in your heart. You may not understand what he's doing until tomorrow, a year from now, or 10 years down the road. You may never fully understand what he is doing. But the thing about it is, what you can know is no matter what the situation turns out or how the situation turns out, whatever it is that you're going through, that God has been there all along. He's never taken his eyes off you for a second, and he is there helping you, wanting to help you through this. So that's the first thing to remember, is that no matter what the situation you're going through, is that God has not abandoned you. And the second thing is this: know that the guaranteed outcome in the situation is that you will become more like Jesus as you trust in him. I'm not going to promise that things are going to work out. I'm not going to say, well, if you trust in Jesus, then it's all going to work out. It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be wonderful. I'm not going to promise you that. Life is unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen. But what you can know for sure is that for a Christian, if you are a Christian, and I hope that you are, then at the end of it, you'll become more like Jesus as you trust in him, no matter what happens. When you trust in him, it'll be okay. Not that the thing that happened was okay or good, but that you trusting in him will give you a peace to know that because he is with you, that's what makes it okay. And that as you do this, you become more and more like Jesus. The plan that we read in Romans 8:28-30 is to make us more like Jesus. That's the goal. So that should give us greater hope than any other definition of working all things for our good, or to say everything is good or okay that happens. Only God alone truly knows what is good for us. The greatest good he could ever do for us is to make us more like Jesus. And that's what these verses point out. We're meant to be like him, and God will do that for us. Think about that. That God will mold us if we allow him, if we let him. So what does it mean for us? How do we understand this passage? What is it? What is the takeaway for us? Here's the thing. If you're going through a difficulty, my hope for you is that it turns out okay. That everything works out, whether it's the difficulty of just stress of school and finishing up and all these projects, all these events, all these things that are wham, 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 wham. I don't know what it is, why we do this to ourselves. Like January, February, everything's like, there's nothing. Spring break happens, boom, and all of a sudden we have all of these things that are happening at once, and it can be quite stressful, right? It's like every week there's something new. So we have that, or it may be, relationship issues. You might be having a problem with a special someone, or you might be having a problem in the family, or there might be some sort of health issue that's going through. Maybe you're going through it, or somebody else is going through it. So, whatever this, my hope is that things work out and things are okay. And it's not about this. This is not about dragging you down or making you feel like everything is hopeless, because, have hope. Pray about these things. Pray about the things that you want to see happen in your situation. Believe that God is taking care of it and hope that it all turns out okay. We can hope in that. But the bigger thing for us, we can know that God is still good. Even if things don't turn out the way we want to, we can know that God is still good, that God is still at work, that God still has purpose for your life, and even in the moments that you're going through extreme difficulties. And that's the big takeaway. Because here's the thing. The situation that you might be going through may not be a good situation, but it doesn't mean that God can take good from it. We already talked about how God can mold us to be more like Jesus. That's something good that can come from the bad situation. Not that the bad situation was good or the difficult or stress, whatever. Not that it was good or okay, that's not how it is. But the big takeaway for us is that we can trust God when things are not okay, that he can take what is not okay or good and bring good out of it. That while the situation may not be good or okay, that what God can do with it can be good and okay. I want to talk about, let me finish up with what I was going to say about my nephew, Brendan, who passed away. That stunk. That hurt. But the thing that came from it, the thing that one of the things that resulted from that was a good thing. And the thing for us is that my family became closer. It wasn't like we weren't distant or anything like that, but it drew us together closer to where we talked more. We spend more time together. And today, it's the same way. I typically will hear from my brothers at least once a week. That's a good thing. It was a ripple effect of what happened here. I would rather, please hear me out. I'm grateful for this, but if there was an opportunity for my nephew not to die, I would have rather had that, right? That wasn't a good thing, him passing away. But the closeness of my brothers as a result of that in my family, especially when my mom was going through the health issues that she was going through back in the fall, that was a good that came out of it. I had another friend, or I had a friend, not another friend. I had a friend. He was with another friend, and they were doing like clearing room ops, and they were going through rooms, acting like they're going to clear a room. Like cop training is kind of what it was, and kind of like cop practice. And they didn't realize the other friend didn't realize that there was live ammunition in the guns that they were using, and and neither one of them realized that there was live ammunition. They didn't realize what was going on, and the other friend, my friend, he was going to surprise and jump and surprise the other friend, and he goes and does that, and the other friend shoots him in the chest. He dies like that. I think about him all the time. That was not a good thing. But the thing that came from it, the thing that was good, one of the things that was good that came from it, is that the other friend who shot him was not a believer. And through the process, he became a believer. Not that the thing was good, but that God brought good from it. And that's what God does. He conforms us. If we trust in him, he conforms us to be more like Jesus, and he can bring good out of it. So I hope that this has been encouraging to you. I hope it is encouraging for you to remember that no matter what the outcome is, God has not abandoned you, that God is working, continuing to work in you, to know that they guarantee, and that God can take good out of the bad situation. And that one of the things that he can do is to make us more like Jesus. So whatever the situation is that you may be going through, I want to encourage you to trust in him. And so that no matter the outcome, know that it is going to be okay. Not that the thing, the difficulty is okay or good, but that God can do good from it. Let me pray with you. Father, I thank you so much for today. Thank you for all that you've done. Lord, I pray that you just be with those that are watching. Father, I pray that this is an encouragement to them, that they grab hold of this passage and have a fresh understanding of what it means, Lord. And that in those moments of difficulty, in those moments of stress, Father, may they lean heavily into you. And it's in your name I pray. Amen. Thanks, guys. I'll see you guys. Don't forget, there's no youth discipleship this Sunday or next Sunday, but we will have a youth meeting after church next Sunday night, April 28th. Okay, guys, love y'all. Reach out to me if you have any questions or want to talk or anything like that. And I'll see you soon. Bye.